Today's number 24 most urgent vulnerability is CVE 2026-16956 in IBM Db2 Mirror for I, and it earns attention because it is a critical remote command execution issue, not just another routine enterprise bug. This is the Daily Ranked CVE Brief, What to Patch First, ranked by Real Exploitation Signal. CISA Kev, First EPSS and CVSS every day. Even though this CVE is not currently listed in CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, the technical severity is high enough that exposed environments should treat it as a priority. The official NVD description says, IBM Db2 Mirror for I, 7.4, 7.5, and 7.6 could allow a remote attacker to execute arbitrary commands because special elements used in an operating system command are not properly neutralized. In plain English, if an affected interface passes user-controlled input into an OS command without safely handling dangerous characters, an attacker may be able to make the system run commands it was never supposed to run. CVE 2026-16956 affects IBM Db2 Mirror for I, specifically the product named in the NVD entry as IBM Db2 Mirror for I 7.4, 7.5, and 7.6. The weakness is CWE-78, improper neutralization of special elements used in an operating system command. That phrase sounds abstract, so here's the practical version. Many applications need to ask the operating system to do work, run a utility, call a script, manage a process, or trigger a backend operation. If the application builds that command using input it receives, and it does not correctly separate data from command syntax, then special characters can change the meaning of the command. The application thinks it is handling normal input. The operating system interprets part of that input as instructions. That is command injection. The consequence described here is arbitrary command execution, meaning the attacker's influence can move beyond the application layer and into commands executed by the underlying system context. Verdict: this is a critical patch candidate because the CVSS vector describes a remotely reachable low-friction path to full system impact. The score is 9.8 under CVSS 3.1. And the two metrics that matter most are network attack vector and no privileges required. Network attack vector means the vulnerability is considered reachable over a network, rather than requiring local access. No privileges required means the attacker does not need an existing account to reach the vulnerable condition, according to the scoring. Pair that with low attack complexity and no user interaction, and defenders should assume that exposure matters a lot. The impact side is also severe. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are all rated high. In practical terms, successful command execution can threaten data secrecy, system trust, and service continuity. CVSS does not prove exploitation is happening, but it tells us the design of the flaw leaves very little room for comfort if the affected component is exposed. The important nuance: CISA Kev status is false for this CVE based on today's data. That means it is not listed in CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog at the time of this brief. But Kev false does not mean safe. It means we do not have that specific government catalog signal of known exploitation. The risk picture still includes a 9.8 critical CVSS score and an EPSS percentile of 0.61059, which places it above a meaningful portion of vulnerabilities in modeled exploitation likelihood. For a command injection bug in a server-side enterprise product, the real-world concern is that a successful attacker may not be limited to reading an application response. Depending on the context in which commands run, they may be able to alter data, disrupt services, or pivot into operational workflows. For organizations using IBM I environments where availability and data consistency are business critical, even a short disruption can have outsized impact. So the right stance is not panic. It is rapid scoping and disciplined remediation. Conceptually, this class of flaw becomes dangerous when an attacker can reach a function that ultimately feeds input into an operating system command. We do not need exploit steps to understand the defensive exposure model. First, identify where IBM Db2 Mirror for I is reachable. Management paths, service endpoints, integration points, or any network accessible component tied to the product. Second, think about trust boundaries. If a request can arrive from an untrusted network, a partner network, a user segment, or the internet, and the vulnerable component processes data that reaches command construction, that is the risk zone. Third, remember that authentication is not credited in the CVSS score as required. So do not rely on the assumption that only trusted users can trigger the condition, unless your own architecture clearly enforces that at the network layer. The defensive takeaway is simple. Reduce who can talk to the affected service, verify whether vulnerable versions are present, and apply the vendor's remediation. Command injection is often about a small input boundary, producing a much larger system-level effect. To check exposure, start with inventory, not assumptions. Find systems running IBM Db2 Mirror for I, and record the installed product version. The NVD description names IBM Db2 Mirror for I 7.4, 7.5, and 7.6, but for exact affected builds, fixed levels, prerequisites, and any environmental conditions, defer to IBM's advisory. Do not guess based only on a major release label if the vendor has provided specific guidance. Next, map reachability. Which networks can connect to the relevant Db2 Mirror for I services or management surfaces? Are they limited to a tightly controlled administrative segment, or are they reachable from broad internal networks? Are there firewall rules, access control lists, VPN boundaries, or jump hosts in front of them? Also identify business criticality, production pairs, high availability dependencies, and systems where downtime or data inconsistency would be especially costly. The goal is to build a short, accurate list. Affected or potentially affected, reachable or not reachable, production or lower environment, remediated or pending. The primary action is to follow IBM's official guidance for CVE 2026-16956 and apply the recommended remediation for your environment. Because we only have the reference URL and not its contents here, this brief will not invent patch names, fix levels, or commands. Use the vendor advisory as the source of truth. In parallel, apply practical hardening. Restrict access to Db2 Mirror for I components to only the systems and administrators that actually need it. Block unnecessary inbound paths at firewalls and network controls. Review service accounts and runtime permissions so that if a flaw is reached, the execution context is not more powerful than it needs to be. Confirm that administrative access requires strong controls and that logging is enabled where available. After remediation, validate. Recheck product levels, confirm the vulnerable exposure has been removed or reduced, and document the change. For critical systems, coordinate patching with operations teams, but avoid letting change windows become indefinite postponement. A 9.8 command execution issue deserves an exception-driven process, not a wait-and-see posture. Detection should focus on behavior that would be abnormal for your Db2 Mirror for I environment. Because this is OS command injection, watch for unexpected command execution patterns, unusual child processes, scripts launched outside normal maintenance windows, or system utilities being invoked by service contexts that normally should not start them. Monitor for sudden changes in files, configurations, scheduled tasks, or operational scripts connected to the affected host. Network-wise, look for unusual outbound connections from systems that normally have stable, predictable communication patterns. On the application and system logging side, look for spikes in errors, malformed requests, rejected input, or repeated probing behavior around interfaces exposed to less trusted networks. The key is baseline comparison. What does normal administration look like in your environment? Who normally connects? From where? At what times? And what actions follow? Alerts are strongest when they detect deviation from that normal pattern. If you suspect exploitation, preserve logs, isolate affected systems according to your incident response plan, and involve the team responsible for IBM I operations before making disruptive changes. Bottom line, CVE 2026-16956 is today's number 24 most urgent vulnerability on our ranked list, because it combines a critical 9.8 CVSS score with a serious weakness class, CWE-78 OS command injection. It affects IBM Db2 Mirror for I as described by NVD, with 7.4, 7.5, and 7.6 named in the entry. It is not on CISA KEV today, but the absence of KEV listing is not a reason to delay if you have reachable affected systems. Your priorities are: identify where IBM Db2 Mirror for I is deployed, verify exact exposure against IBM's advisory, apply the vendor remediation, restrict network access, and monitor for abnormal command execution or service behavior. This is the Daily Ranked CVE Brief. What to patch first, ranked by real exploitation signal, every day. Subscribe for the next ranked breakdown, and check the full ranked CVE report linked in the description.